To continue the thought about order and chaos and structure and kind of margin or remnant, and in a sense, life and death, very broadly speaking, a lot of the time, the way that it turns out is that kind of that remnant piece is kind of like the seed and the principle of the structured piece. For instance, in society, um, society continues because new beings continue to be grown, to be born into the world. And this happens because of the experience of eroticism, or the experience of dissolution and chaos, in which, well, you know, two become one, the boundaries become dissolved between two beings in a physical way, in a spiritual way, in an emotional way. And this is really existentially threatening. Again, I'm not saying if you get married or if you're in a relationship, it has to be an experience of existential threat. But in a philosophical way, it technically does. And there are plenty of times when that does, rear its head. This is actually just as I was saying in the whole bushes of love thing. I've already been there. We know what's waiting in the bushes of love. But yeah, but you can see that because okay, let me start over. For the purposes of society, a person is a separate individual who contributes to society in XYZ ways. And then when I'm taking it not really talking about like real life manifestations of this, but I'm talking about, let's say that it's a Romeo and Juliet thing, except they live and they have kids. Wait. Yeah. Wait, okay, that's got me on a different track, because obviously the thing about Romeo and Juliet is that they don't live and have kids. They push that eroticism to its fullest extent, and then they die. Although they kind of die because the society around them won't let them like be together. Like, in theory, in other circumstances, they could have been worked back into the system. Yeah. But you can still see, the threat to the system contained. Well, I'm still going to use Romeo and Juliet. Let's use, because you can see that the threat to the system contained in that. In their world, Romeo's Romeo, Juliet's Juliet. They're part of their different families. They're a part of their different lifestyles that they're being raised to lead, etc. They step out of that. There is that gateway. There is that wound. There is that intrusion and experience of chaos and eroticism and everything, and they become attached to each other in this way. They're outside of their side. They don't care about it anymore. They don't care about anything anymore except for each other and this connection that they have. They would probably kill for each other. They will destroy themselves for each other. That's very destructive. That's very threatening to the entire. Clearly, it's very threatening. It's kind of the point of the story, is it is very threatening to the entire structure out of which they sprung. And yet, in order for that structure to continue, we need new people. How do new people come into the world? Literally by two beings reproducing, which is an experience of dissolution of boundaries. And it is something that yeah, even taking the reproduction part out of it, if you're pregnant and then you have a child, you're also kind of taken out of your own self in that. And that's also kind of in an existentially threatening way to you in order to bring that new life. So you see, there is that kind of, again, inverse and kind of, is it called chiastic, where it's an X? But there's that kind of paradoxical relationship where the thing that's this threat to the structure, is also what sustains it and continues it. And so that's the circle of life. That's the circle of life, is moving in and out of that. And you don't want to spend too much time in the order, just all work and no play, and you don't want to spend too much time out in chaos. Both of those will produce. I don't want to say death because I'm already using death in another way. You see, that's why terms like death is so confusing, because it's so all-encompassing, but that will produce, it'll be bad, okay, it'll be destructive. But I don't even know if I want to say destruction either, because the chaos realm involves destruction. So it'll produce like a meta destruction. Can we just say imbalance, I guess? Because I'm trying to think of how to distinguish between the destruction that's involved in, let's say, when two individual people's individual lives are destroyed so that they can be melded together, versus the destruction that occurs when a hurricane, or no, let's not use that. When the destruction occurs. The destruction that would occur if all those two people did, all day, was just only be with each other and like only have sex all day and not even eat or do anything else. Or the destruction that occurs when a society doesn't prioritize, or on the other side, the destruction that occurs when a society doesn't prioritize the human at all and becomes like we see in many societies across time and today, where it becomes all about the structure. If you go out of that at all, out of line, you're punished for it. And it's just about the line going up of productivity and nothing else that's outside of that. So those are destructive in a way that sacred transgression, or sacred, like, that's the other word that I didn't bring up, was transgression, but experiences of what I was calling the sacred remnant are not destructive in that same way. Or like not as, it's just like a little taste of it. And yeah, I guess that then you get to the idea of how I understand the cross, conquering death by death. What was it? He tasted death for every person. So because you have this figure that tastes death and the chaos and all of that, the chaos and the destruction that is produced by our systems and all that, he tastes all that, then that sustains, that protects us from it, or that losing, that doesn't quite fit with what I was going for, but I think the idea of conquering death by death, the idea of, say, inoculating yourself to a poison by ingesting a little bit of it, or the idea of the Christ. And I don't quite exactly believe in this in my theology. It's a little bit more abstract than that, but the idea of a savior figure going into death on behalf of the whole so that the whole can continue undisturbed, that fits into what we're talking about, of structure and remnants, structure and transgression, order and chaos, the world and wilderness and death. Now I would say life and death, but because of what I was just talking about at the beginning, because of that X and because of that way in which marginal experiences are the seed and sustain the whole, what you think of when you think of life, it's about 50-50 at least. I mean, generally when people think about life, if you think about the richness and the fullness of life, you're going to think about what are really transcendent experiences outside of the workday realm. You're going to think about having fun and celebration and falling in love, and you might even think about experiences of great sorrow that have to do with death and loss that also kind of take you out. So when we say life, I think that term is associated at least just as much with the experiences of chaos, remnant, transgression, as with the experiences of structure and order and the sustaining of things. So that's why I don't necessarily want to say life versus death. And in another sense, death is also associated with both, because you could think of death as in, what happened to Romeo and Juliet, or you could think of death as in the kind of being a zombie. And yeah, but I think it's not quite as commonly thought of. The connotation isn't always there as much. But this also leads me to the subject of, like, faith. Yeah, the subject of faith and the way that in Jesus's parables, the things that he would say, the way that he handled that. And the way that it says, we have to enter through the narrow gate. You can't crawl in or go in any other way. And the way that he spoke in these parables, that wasn't a straightforward thing. And that didn't follow and that overturned the logic of the workaday world. And I think you could look at the thing that we're having faith in, or in those parables, it's the kingdom of God. And I am going to be using Christian language for this because I can't try to follow my train of thought and make my language more universal at the same time. But I'm not just talking about Christianity, and honestly, the Christian language is probably just as confusing as it is enlightening, because I don't mean to put all the dogma with it, but yeah, there's an idea of standing in your context and then transcending that, going out of it, coming into a new way of living, of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. To me, what's being discussed there, the kingdom, you could look at it as a way of life that's radical, that's opposed to the structure of things, as in, and like a lot of saints and a lot of the lives of saints and people, those are very much marginal figures who just, well, if everyone lived that way, the world would simply cease to exist. Everyone couldn't do that. If everyone starved themselves and like fasted for, if everyone was monastic and didn't even want to be distracted with this world enough to get married, the world, you see. So you could look at the kingdom as only existing in the margins and in the realm of chaos like that. And I think you could also look at it as a kind of synthesis of both, where you have the structured world being reinvigorated by and being in balance with the realm of chaos, the remnant, the margin, the excess, and, well, as my friend says, all rot, all honey, all excess. And in the end, unity with a capital U. And if you have those two generally in the world, they aren't really in balance. And, you either have it too dry or too wet, so to speak, either desert or flood. And the kingdom, the way that I usually think of it is kind of like both of those elements brought into connection. Or you could even say earth and heaven brought into connection, if we think of earth as the structure and then heaven as the things that take us out of that structure, and that also underlay that structure in very deep ways that we cannot ignore. But why is it said that you have to take these things on faith? Why is it through these paradoxical and kind of upside down turning and then almost sometimes like nonsensical seeming illustrations that this invitation is made is because of the nature of what is being offered. Because the invitation to faith, the invitation to the kingdom of heaven, to a renewed or higher world or way of living, is how structurally what that is your world, your structured, ordered world and context that highlights certain things and hides others, then bringing into light the very important things that are hidden by that structured world and context, and inviting you to step out of it and get some perspective and be transformed and changed and, well, have your boundaries broken down a little, etc., etc. But it's inviting you out of that context. And so that means that, the context of that world means everything that sustains the everyday world or the everyday world of a society, including, the fundamental logic of it. Because what a world and a society is all about, this is from Technique and Magic, is about instruments and production and logical flow. I do A so that B and C will happen. All of that is what makes up a world, a structured world. Again, world, just like life, kind of encapsulates both of these sides of things, of order and chaos sometimes. So when I say world, I generally am talking about the structured, sustaining kind of aspect of it that wants to be productive and that keeps things in their places and in their strict relationships to each other. And yeah, that's on every level. And so to step out of that is you can't, there's no cheating it. If you're gonna go, well, let me think. Well, it's not a perfect analogy because of what I said about the kingdom both being the memento mori part, but also the whole thing's kind of reintegrated. But if you're gonna go on vacation, you have to actually physically get up and go. There's no way to try to get it secondhand while still working. That doesn't have quite the same effect. And there's no hello song that goes, your dowry isn't fooling, the pyrite is showing through, it won't buy you that empty tomb, and no alchemic incantation for a counterfeit salvation can appease your Leviathan groom. No, love will get you slaughtered like a lamb at the altar. What is safe ain't the same as what is good. So lay compress to the aching of your body made for breaking. I think we've got a lot of breaking left to do. And that's kind of talking about this, that it requires a genuine movement out of your original context, and you can't really cheat that. And the other thing is that since you're moving, you can kind of, and from the inside of your context, the outside, you can only really understand it by analogies and by parables and by little glimpses. But you can't really capture it and bring it inside. That's the nature of the outside. And it's not about any particular thing. It's not a thing. It's not about any particular thing that you could pin down and bottle up and bring in to the order of things, because in its essence, that the kingdom, remnant, the sacred, the erotic, it's not about a a thing. It's not because it's about, because the whole way that things and instruments exist in the world, that's part of the world. That's part of the structured world. Like, if you make it into a thing, then you kind of kill it. And you simply have, now you've just made it back into part of the ordered system. For instance, again, going back to the being in love as an example of stepping out into the, if you just say, okay, well, to be in love with someone, you're gonna, go through this and this step, you learn these facts about each other, then you live with each other for such and such a time, and you do this, this, and this, and you just like follow those steps, and that's all. That doesn't, you've just made it into a system, and that it's not, it lacks the animating spirit of it. Or, of course, in the case of religion, of course, the law, broadly speaking, not talking about Judaism. I respect Judaism, and I hope that, from what I understand, Jewish people construe these categories quite differently. So, I'm sorry, because this is not really, I'm not able to put this in their terms. I don't really know how to do it. Anyway, the law as in technic. If you make religion, the lifestyle of religion, about the law and about doing such and such a thing, it's not about the specific things, about the way of it. So, again, if you have not charity, it profits nothing. You can do everything right, but the idea of doing certain things in order to get certain things, the idea of, well, yeah, that idea inherently belongs to the realm of order and structure, the realm of the world. And so, doesn't matter whether you're talking about making money or increasing your virtue. If you're thinking about it in those terms, you're still in the system. Which, again, not inherently a bad thing. We require a balance. But the invitation of, like, faith and a lot of religion and the kingdom of heaven is an invitation out of that structure into marginal and remnant excess kind of experiences. And then I believe you kind of integrate it back in it synthesizes. But first of all, it's a step out. First and foremost, it's a step out. It's kind of a constant stepping out. Yeah. But that's why it's in these, you're just like, people were just like, okay, well, tell me what to do. Tell me the steps. Tell me. No. Because again, it's not about the content. It's about the way of it. And the way of eroticism, death, and sensuality is very different inherently from the way of, the items can be the same. Again, kind of going back to math, you can have the same numbers, but you can do different operations to them, and you get a very different result and a very different thing that's going on. And another point to make about this is that this movement, radical movement, and this invitation, and it doesn't have to do with moving from a secular framework to a religious framework. It just has to do with moving out of a more closed framework and world and priorities into this kind of more open one. So, for instance, so you often see this put in terms of, well, I was secular, I was an atheist, and I was all about my body and my physical pleasures, and then I saw the light, and I came to God, and I started caring about other people, and I started caring about, the unity of everything, and I became all this. And that's your classic movement out of the secular world, the structured and ordered everyday world, into something where you're attuned to something higher. beyond death and all of that, and therefore through the breaking of boundaries and all that. But it doesn't have to be about that, because, for instance, my context and order was very much using the language, the structures, and the experiences of religion. It was, your job is to increase your virtue. Your job is to bring other people into this, as many as possible, as thoroughly as possible. And this is your productive role. And that's your job. And the movement that I made has been into, like, I don't know, going to a party and just being there and hanging out, or having friends and just hanging out with them, or like relearning the ACTs so that I can go to college or something. And that is what has a lot of the things that have been spiritual for me, or been transcendent, or opened me up into the kingdom of God. They're secular things. They're things that are more connected with the body in the immediate world. They're not religious. Because it's not about the content of it, it's about the way of it. So again, not about secular versus religious. Deeper than that. But in another sense, it is about the content of it, because of beauty, and because of what I was talking about like, or I think this was in the last video, but in like, these transcendent experiences are often through the flesh, and through sensuality, and through the body and the material, even though the nature of the ordered, structured world is the material. But it's through the very most material that we go into the very most transcendent. So there's all of those underlying, usual paradoxes and kind of inverses that apply in this case too. So, the form it's not about the, the exact boxes you're checking off or whatever. But then there's also a kind of specificity, again, in the way that, for instance, Jesus puts things. The form that he puts them in matters, because he doesn't give you a list of the parables aren't just like a list of things to do and a list of things that make logical sense. Again, logical is part of this whole instrumental thing. Habitual, instrumental, etc. Productive. He gives you, it's poetry. It's an image that is what it is. And you can't really, if you boil it down, you lose something about it, and you lose something essential about it. And it's about the form of it. As much as or more than it's about the facts delivered in that form. So the invitation from is kind of given in a poetic way. Because as I understand it, poetry and poetic language is the more that the form is inherent in the content, the more that the form is the content, the more that this could not be said any other way, and it just says what it says. And if you rephrase it, you've made a different thing. The more that is true, the more that it's poetic. Of course, such things do also tend to spawn a lot of analogical retellings, and I guess I could go off on that tangent. I have no idea where that's going. But in essence, there is a difference between a parable and, an injunction, or a practical set of steps. And the way that poetic and parable language works is also kind of the way that one might say the life of faith Again, the word faith is really like loaded, so I usually would try not to use it, but that's the way that the life, all these words are loaded, whatever. The life of the kingdom of heaven works also in that way. It is what it is. It's not for any other purpose but itself. A poem exists so that you can read it and experience it, and it soaks into your perceptual system and changes how you see other things, but it inheres in itself. And similarly, an experience that's in the remnants and the chaos kind of area of things doesn't exist for any outside purpose. It's just for its own sake. And it's its own reward, it's its own punishment. And yeah, because it's outside of that realm of productivity and production, linear sustaining in linear time. And like the point is the stepping out of your context and your logical ways of thinking and productive ways of thinking and being. And so that's why it's by faith or by trust, you might say, and that's why it's this kind of going into the unknown. And that's also why I was walking and it kind of clicked for me about why there's that bit about like, if you come in another way, you're a thief and a robber, only the one that enters through the door is legitimate, is because the only way in to the experience of the kingdom is through faith. Yeah, you have to leave behind these boundaries and expectations and all that, because all of that is what the world that you're leaving is made of. And by definition, you can't keep that and pass through. Or well, you kind of can, but that's in like a higher level of synthesis or whatever. That's, again, I'm mostly talking about kingdom or the life of faith as that initial step out of the world into the transcendent. And it does. It's a flipping upside down and all that. And it's also all for its own sake, and it inheres in itself. And that's why you can't put it in other terms, and that's why you can't. That's why no alchemic incantation for a counterfeit salvation will appease your Leviathan groom. Because it is the faith, it is the trust, and it is the leaving behind the expectations, the chain of cause and effect, the priorities and the logic of the structured and ordered world. Because that's what it is. And that also means that in the end, there's no proof for it, because proof is something that belongs over here. And there's no final reward or punishment for it, because again, that's something that belongs over here. What you're doing is you're stepping out of that and you're putting yourself in another realm of things. And that's all, then you're there. So it's an invitation. And given that a lot of the time, both the life of the sacred or like the marginal and remnant is expressed as having to do with love, desire, eroticism, and that also the life of the kingdom of heaven and the life when we reintegrate everything and and live in a balance of it or a synthesis of it is expressed as having to do with love. Because I think that's, I don't know, that's the shorthand for stuff that breaks boundaries and is just for itself. Love and beauty and pleasure. And death, I guess. Given that, I think that a poem that I wrote illustrates this. And I guess you could look at it as a person to God or God to a person. And I'm gonna close with this. In the spirit of the form of something, delivering the content and being a gateway into the experience of something. I love you more than my love for you. Love you more than the pain of loving you and the sentimentality of it. I love you more than any justification for loving you. I love you more than the reasons for loving. Love you more than loving you is good or right or healthy. I love you more than whatever noble and meaningful process my loving you entails. I love you more than this poem, and more than all my thoughts trying to shore up my loving you. I love you more than my understanding that I love you. I do not love you, and I glance away from you, and I love you. I love you more than the proof that I love you. I love you more than the proof that I am allowed to love you. Love you more than this poem, more than the stepping back from it and observing with self-satisfied, sterilizing relief that I am feeling a true principle, that this proves my love is truly love. Love you more than all the uses my love or this poem could be put to. I love you more than the death of loving you, and my slow death of loving you. I love you more than that you are my life. What's that? Life. Mine. I love you more than love. I love you more than you. And I love you more than God, and love you more than the demurring by which I prove that my loving you and scorning God is God. Away with all those terms, determinations. I want you, not all these excuses. Damn you, classification and definition. Damn you, approval of my love, which makes it neither mine nor love, which makes it an instrument. All that can go away. All that can burn up, and even the burning up of them can burn up. All that is not you, all that is I would burn and burn and burn and you come here now, taste how I love you. It's nothing, nothing.